He gunned his motor at the stoplight, trying to decide which was the faster route to Harper Avenue. The new Ryan Expressway was very quick, but it would land him in the thick of the Negro traffic on West 51st Street, where people promenaded or cruised in their cars. There was Garfield Boulevard, much better. However, he was not sure he could find his way through Washington Park after dark. He decided to follow Edens to Congress Street, and Congress to the Outer Drive. Yes, that would be fastest. What he would do when he got to Harper Avenue he hadn't yet decided. Madeline had threatened him with arrest if he so much as showed his face near the house. The police had his picture, but that was sheer bunk. Bunk and paranoia. The imperiousness of imaginary powers that had once impressed him. But there was now a real matter between him and Madeline. A child. A reality. June, out of cowardice, sickness, fraud, by a bungling father, out of a plotting bitch, something genuine. This little daughter of his, he cried out to himself as he raced up the ramp of the expressway that nobody would harm her. He accelerated, moving in his lane with the rest of the traffic. The thread of life was stretched tight in him. It quivered crazily. He did not fear its breaking so much as his failing to do what he should. The little falcon was storming. He thought his speed was terrible until a huge trailer truck passed him on the right, when he realized that this was not the time to risk a traffic ticket, not with a pistol in his pocket, and lifted his foot from the pedal. Peering left and right, he recognized that the new expressway had been cut through old streets. Streets he knew. He saw the vast gas tanks crowned with lights from a new perspective, and the rear of a Polish church with a Christ in brocades exhibiting in a lighted window, like a showcase. The long curve eastbound passed over the freight yards, burning with sunset dust, rails streaking westward. Next, the tunnel under the mammoth post office. Next, the State Street honky-tonks. From the last slope of Congress Street, the distortions of dusk raised up the lake like a mild wall crossed by hands, amethyst, murky blue, irregular silver, and a slate color at the horizon, boats hanging rocking inside the breakwater, the helicopters and small aircraft whose lights teetered overhead. The familiar odor of the fresh water, bland but also raw, reached him as he sped south. It did not seem illogical that he should claim the privilege of insanity, violence, having been made to carry the rest of it, name-calling and gossip, railroading, pain, even exile in Ludeville. That property was to have been his madhouse, finally his mausoleum. But they had done something else to Herzog, unpredictable. It's not everyone who gets the opportunity to kill with a clear conscience. They had opened the way to justifiable murder. They deserved to die. He had a right to kill them. They would even know why they were dying. No explanation necessary. When he stood before them, they would have to submit. Gersbach would only hang his head with tears for himself. Like Nero, qualis artifex pereo. Madeline would shriek and curse, out of hatred, the most powerful element in her life, stronger by far than any other power or motive. In spirit, she was his murderess, and therefore he was turned loose, could shoot or choke with remorse. He felt in his arms and in his fingers, and to the core of his heart, the sweet exertion of a strangling horrible and sweet and orgastic rapture of inflicting death. He was sweating violently, his shirt wet and cold under his arms. Into his mouth came a taste of copper, a metabolic poison, a flat but deadly flavor. When he reached Harper Avenue, he parked around the corner and entered the alley that passed behind the house. Grit spilled on the concrete, broken glass, and gravelly ashes made his steps loud. He went carefully. The back fences were old here. Garden soil spilled under the slats, and shrubs and vines came over their tops. Once more he saw open honeysuckle, even rambler roses, dark red in the dusk. He had to cover his face when he passed the garage because of the loops of briar that swung over the path from the sloping roof. When he stole into the yard, he stood still until he could see his way. He must not stumble over a toy or a tool. A fluid had come into his eyes, very clear, only somewhat distorting. He wiped it away with fingertips and blotted, too, with the lapel of his coat. Stars had come out, violet points framed in roof shapes, leaves, strut wires. The yard was visible to him now. He saw the clothesline, Madeline's underpants, and his daughter's little shirts and dresses, tiny stockings. By the light of the kitchen window, he made out a sandbox in the grass, a new red sandbox with broad ledges to sit on. Stepping nearer, he looked into the kitchen. Madeline was there. He stopped breathing as he watched her. She was wearing slacks and a blouse, fastened with a broad leather and brass belt he had given her. Her smooth hair hung loose as she moved between the table and the sink, cleaning up after dinner, scraping dishes in her own style of abrupt efficiency. He studied her straight profile as she stood at the sink, the flesh under her chin as she concentrated on the foam in the sink, tempering the water. He could see the color in her cheeks and almost the blue of her eyes. Watching, he fed his rage to keep it steady up to full strength. She was not likely to hear him in the yard because the storm windows had not been taken down. Not at least those he had put up last fall at the back of the house. He moved into the passageway. Luckily, the neighbors were not at home, and he did not have to worry about their lights. He had his look at Madeline. It was his daughter he wanted to see now. The dining room was unoccupied. After dinner emptiness. Coke bottles, paper napkins. Next was the bathroom window, set higher than the rest. He remembered, however, that he had used a cement block to stand on, trying to take out the bathroom screen until he had discovered there was no storm window to replace it. The screen was still in, therefore, and the block, it was exactly where he had left it among the lilies of the valley on the left side of the path. He moved it into place, the scraping covered by the sound of water in the tub, and stood on it, his side pressed to the building. He tried to muffle the sound of his breathing, opening his mouth. In the rushing water with floating toys, his daughter's little body shone. His child, Madeline, had let her black hair grow longer, and now it was tied up for the bath with a rubber band. He melted with tenderness for her, putting his hand over his mouth to cover any sound emotion might cause him to make. She raised her face to speak to someone he could not see. Above the flow of water, he heard her say something, but could not understand the words. Her face was the Herzog face, the large dark eyes with his eyes, the nose his father's, Tante Zipporah's his brother Willie's nose, and the mouth his own. Even the bit of melancholy in her beauty, that was his mother. It was Sarah Herzog, pensive, slightly averting her face, as she considered the life about her. Moved, he watched her breathing with open mouth, his face half covered by his hand. Flying beetles passed him. Their heavy bodies struck the screen, but did not attract her notice. Then a hand reached forward and shut off the water. A man's hand. It was Gersbach. He was going to bathe Herzog's daughter. Gersbach. His waist was now in sight. He came into view, stalking beside the old-fashioned round tub, bowing, straightening, bowing his Venetian hobble, and then, with great trouble, he began to kneel, and Herzog saw his chest, his head, as he arranged himself, flattened to the wall, his chin on his shoulder. Herzog saw Gersbach roll up the sleeves of his paisley sports shirt, put back his thick glowing hair, take the soap, heard him say, not unkindly, "Okay, count out the monkey shines," for Junie was giggling, twisting, splashing, dimpling, showing her tiny white teeth, wrinkling her nose, teasing. "Now hold still," said Gersbach. He got into her ears with the wash-rag as she screamed, cleaned off her face, the nostrils, wiped her mouth. He spoke with authority, but affectionately, and with grumbling smiles, and occasionally with laughter he bathed her, soaped, rinsed, dipping water in her toy boots to rinse her back, as she squealed and twisted. The man washed her tenderly. His look, perhaps, was false, but he had no true expressions, Herzog thought. His face was all heaviness, sexual meat. Looking down his open shirt front, Herzog saw the hair-covered, heavy, soft flesh of Gersbach's breast. His chin was thick, and like a stone axe, a brutal weapon. And then there were his sentimental eyes, the thick crest of hair, and the hearty voice, with its peculiar fraudulence and grossness. The hated traits were all there. But see how he was with June, scooping the water on her playfully, kindly. He let her wear her mother's flowered shower cap, the rubber petals spreading on the child's head. Then Gersbach ordered her to stand, and she looped slightly to allow him to wash her little cleft. Her father stared at this. A pang went through him, but it was quickly done. She sat again. Gersbach ran fresh water on her, cumbersomely rose and opened the bath towel. Steady and thorough, he dried her, and then, with a large puff, he powdered her. The child jumped up and down with delight. "Enough of this wild stuff," said Gersbach. "Put on those PJs now." She ran out. Herzog still saw faint wisp of powder that floated over Gersbach's stooping head. His red hair worked up and down. He was scouring the tub. Moses might have killed him now. His left hand touched the gun, enclosed in the roll of rubles. He might have shot Gersbach as he methodically salted the yellow sponge rectangle with cleaning powder. There were 2 bullets in the chamber, but they would stay there. Herzog clearly recognized that. Very softly, he stepped down from his perch and passed without sound through the yard again. He saw his child in the kitchen, looking up at Maddie, asking for something, and he edged through the gate into the alley. Firing this pistol was nothing but a thought. The human soul is an amphibian, and I have touched its sides. Amphibian. It lives in more elements than I will ever know, and I assume that in those remote stars matter is in the making which will create stranger beings yet. I seem to think because June looks like Herzog, she is nearer to me than to them. But how is she near to me if I have no share in her life? Those two grotesque love actors have it all, and I apparently believe that if the child does not have a life resembling mine, educated according to the Herzog standards of heart and all the rest of it, she will fail to become a human being. This is sheer irrationality, and yet some part of my mind takes it as self-evident. But what, in fact, can she learn from them? From Gersbach, when she looks so sugary, repulsive, poisonous? Not an individual, but a fragment, a piece broken off from the mob. To shoot him! An absurd thought. As soon as Herzog saw the actual person giving an actual bath, the reality of it, the tenderness of such a buffoon to a little child, his intended violence turned into theater, into something ludicrous. He was not ready to make such a complete fool of himself. Only self-hatred could lead him to ruin, because his heart was broken. How could it be broken by such a pair? Lingering in the alley a while, he congratulated himself on his luck. His breath came back to him, and how good it felt to breathe. It was worth the trip. Think, he noted to himself in the Falcon on a pad under the map light. Demographers estimate that at least half of all the human beings ever born are alive now in this century. What a moment for the human soul! Characteristics drawn from the genetic pool have, in statistical probability, reconstituted all the best and all the worst of human life. It's all around us. Budo and Laots must be walking the earth somewhere, and Tiberius and Nero. Everything horrible, everything sublime, and things not imagined yet. And you, part-time visionary, cheerful, tragical mammal. You and your children and children's children. In ancient days, the genius of man went largely into metaphors, but now into facts. Francis Bacon, instruments. Then, with inexpressible relish, he added, Tante Zippora told Papa he could never use a gun on anyone, never keep up with teamsters, butchers, sluggers, hooligans, rasboyniks, a gilded little gentleman. Could he hit anyone on the head? Could he shoot? Moses could confidently swear that Father Herzog had never, not once in his life, pulled the trigger of this gun, only threatened, as he threatened me with it. Tayoub defended me then. She saved me. Dear Aunt Tayoub. A cold forge. Poor Father Herzog. But he was not yet willing to call it a day. He had to have a talk with Phoebe Gersbach. It was essential, and he decided not to phone her and give her an opportunity to prepare herself, or even refuse to see him. He drove directly to Woodlawn Avenue, a drearer part of Hyde Park, but characteristic, his Chicago, massive, clumsy, amorphous, smelling of mud and decay, dog turds, sooty facades, slabs of structural nothing. Senselessly ornamented triple porches with red cement urns for flowers that contained only rotting cigarette butts and other stained filth. Sun parlors under tiled gables. rank areaways, grey-back stairs, seamed and ruptured concrete from which sprang grass, ponderous 4x4 fences that sheltered growing weeds. And among these spacious, comfortable, dowdy apartments were where liberal, benevolent people lived. This was the university neighborhood. Herzog did in fact feel at home. He was perhaps as Midwestern and unfocused as these same streets. Not so much determinism, he thought, as a lack of determining elements, the absence of a formative power. But it was all typical, and nothing was lacking, not even the sound of roller skates awkwardly gritting on the pavement beneath new summer leaves. Two poky little girls, under the green transparency of street lamps, skated in short skirts and with ribbons in their hair. A nervous qualm went through him now that he was at Gersbach's gate, but he mastered it and went up the walk, rang the bell. Phoebe approached quickly. She called, "Who is it?" and seeing Herzog through the glass, was silent. Was she scared? "It's an old friend," said Herzog. A moment passed. Phoebe, despite the firmness of her mouth, hesitating, eyes large-lidded beneath her bangs. "Won't you let me in?" Moses asked. His tone made refusal unthinkable. "I won't take much of your time," he said as he was entering. "We do have a few matters to discuss, though." "Come in the kitchen, will you?" Sure, she didn't want to be surprised talking to him in the front room or overheard by little Ephraim, who was in his bedroom. In the kitchen, she shut the door and asked Herzog to sit. The chair her eyes were looking at was beside the refrigerator. There he would not be seen from the kitchen window. With a faint smile, he sat down. From the extreme composure of her slender face, he knew how her heart must be pounding, working perhaps even more violently than his. An orderly person, self-controlled in high degree, clean, the head nurse, she tried to maintain a businesslike look. She was wearing the amber beads he had brought her from Poland. Herzog but toned up his jacket to make sure the butt of his gun did not show. The sight of a weapon would certainly frighten her to death. "Well, how are you, Phoebe?" "We're all right. Comfortably settled. Liking Chicago. Little Ephraim still in the lab school?" "Yes." "And the temple?" "I see that Val taped a program with Rabbi Itzkowitz. What did he call it? Hasidic Judaism? Martin Buber, I and thou? Still, the Buber kick. He's very thick with these rabbis. Maybe he wants to swap wives with the rabbi. He'll work his way round from I and thou to me and you. You and me, kid. But I suppose you'd draw the line there. You wouldn't go along with everything." Phoebe made no answer and remained standing. "Maybe you think I'll leave sooner if you don't sit." "Come, Phoebe, sit down. I promise you, I haven't come to make scenes. I have only one purpose here in addition to wanting to see an old friend." "We're not really old friends." "Not by calendar years. But we were so close out in Ludeville. That is true. You have to think of duration. Bergsonian duration. We have known each other in duration. Some people are sentenced to certain relationships. Maybe every relationship is either a joy or a sentence. You earned your own sentence, if that's how you want to think about it. We had a quiet life till you and Madeline descended on Ludeville and forced yourself on me." Phoebe, her face thin, but hot, eyelids unmoving, sat down on the edge of the chair Herzog had drawn forward for her. Good. Say what you think, Phoebe. That's what I want. Sit back, don't be afraid. I'm not looking for trouble. We've got a problem in common. Phoebe denied this. She shook her head with a stubborn look, all too vigorously. I'm a plain woman. Valentine is from upstate New York. Just a rube. Yes, knows nothing about fancy vices from the big city. Didn't even know how to dial a number. Had to be led step by step into degeneracy by me, Moses E. Herzog. Stiff and hesitant, she turned her body aside in her abrupt way. Then she came to a decision and turned to him again with the same abruptness. She was a pretty woman, but stiff, very stiff, bony, without self-confidence. You never understand a thing about him. He fell for you, adored you, tried to become an intellectual because he wanted to help you, saw what a terrible thing you had done in giving up your respectable university position, and how reckless you were, rushing out to the country with Madeline. He thought she was ruining you and tried to set you on the right track again. He read all those books so you'd have somebody to talk to, out in the sticks, Moses, because you needed help. Praise, flattery, support, affection. It never was enough. You wore him out. It nearly killed him trying to back you up. Yes? What else? Go on, said Herzog. It's still not enough. What do you want from him now? What are you here for? More excitement? Are you still greedy for excitement? Herzog no longer smiled. Some of what you say is right enough, Phoebe. I was certainly floundering in Ludeville, but you take the wind out of me when you say you were leading a perfectly ordinary life up here in Barrington. Until Maddie and I came along with the books and the theatrical glamour, high-level mental life, scattering big-shot ideas and blowing whole ages of history. You were scared by us because we, Maddie especially, gave him confidence. As long as he was only a small-time, gimpy radio announcer, he might bluff at being a big shot. But you had him where you wanted him, because he is a bluffer and a screwball, a kind of freak. But yours? Then he got bolder. He gave his exhibitionism scope. Quite right. I'm an idiot. You were even right to dislike me, if only because I wouldn't see what was happening, and in that way put another burden on you. But why didn't you say something? You watched the whole thing going down. It went on for years. And you said nothing. I wouldn't have been so indifferent if I saw the same thing happening to you. Phoebe hesitated to speak of this, and turned even paler. She said at last, It's not my fault that you refuse to understand the system other people live by. Your ideas get in the way. Maybe a weak person like me has no choice. I couldn't do anything for you, especially last year. I was seeing a psychiatrist, and he advised me to keep away. To keep away from you, most of all from you and all your trouble. He said I wasn't strong enough. And you know it's true. I'm not strong enough. Herzog considered this. Phoebe was weak. That was certainly the truth. He decided to get to the point. Why don't you divorce Valentine? He said. I see no reason why I should. Her voice immediately recovered strength. He's deserted you, hasn't he? Val? I don't know why you say that. I'm not deserted. Where is he now, this evening, this minute? Downtown, on business. Oh, come on, don't pull that stuff on me, Phoebe. He's living with Madeline. Do you deny it? I most certainly do. I can't imagine how you ever got such a fantastic idea. Moses leaned with one arm against the refrigerator as he shifted in his chair and took out a handkerchief, the scrap of kitchen towel from the New York apartment. He wiped his face. "If you would sue for divorce," he explained, "as you have every right to do, you could name Madeline for adultery. I'd help raise the money. I'd underwrite the whole cost. I want Junie. Don't you see? Together we could nail them. You've let Madeline drive you here and there, as if you were a nanny goat. That's the old devil in you talking, Moses. Nanny goat was a mistake. He was making her more obstinate. But anyway, she was going to follow her own line. She'd never share any plan of his. Don't you want me to have custody of June? I'm indifferent to that. You have your own war with Madeline, I suppose," he said, fighting over the man. "A cat fight, a female sex fight. But she'll beat you, because she's a psychopath. I know you've got reserve strength, but she's a nut, and nuts win. Besides, Valentine doesn't want you to get him. I really don't understand what you're saying. He'll lose his value to Madeline as soon as you withdraw. After the victory, she'll have to throw him out. Valentine comes home every night. He's never out late. He should be here soon. When I'm even a little delayed somewhere, why, he gets frantic with worry. He phones all over the city." "Perhaps that's just hope," said Moses. "Hope disguised as concern. Don't you know how that is? If you get killed in an accident, he cries and packs up and moves in with Madeline for good. That's your devil speaking again. My child is going to keep his father. You still want Madeline, don't you?" "Me? Never. All that hysterical stuff is finished. No, I'm glad to be rid of her. I don't even loathe her much anymore. And she's welcome to all she chiseled from me. She must have been banking my money all along. Okay, let her keep it with my blessing. Bless the bitch. Good luck and goodbye. I bless her. I wish her a busy, useful, pleasant, dramatic life, including love. The best people fall in love, and she's one of the best. Therefore, she loves this fellow. They both love. She's not good enough to bring up the kid, though. If he were a wild pig, and those bangs of hers a protective hedge, Phoebe's brown eyes were as vigilant as that. And yet Moses was sorry for her. They bullied her. Gersbach, Madeline through Gersbach. But Phoebe herself meant to win this contest. It must be inconceivable to her that one should set such modest, such minimal goals. Table market, laundry, child, and still lose the struggle. Life couldn't be as indecent as that. Could it? Another hypothesis. Sexlessness was her strength. She wielded the authority of the superego. Still another. She acknowledged the creative depth of modern degeneracy. All the luxuriant vices of emancipated swingers, and thus accepted her situation as a poor, neurotic, dry, unfortunate mudstuck. Middle-class woman. To her, Gersbach was no ordinary man, and because of his richness of character, his spiritual erotic drive, or God knows what foot-smelling metaphysics, he required 2 wives or more. Maybe these 2 women lent his piece of orange tufted flesh to each other for widely different needs. For a 3-legged copulation. For domestic peace. "Phoebe," he said, "admitting you're weak, but how weak are you? Excuse me, I find this pretty funny. You have to deny everything and keep up a perfect appearance. Can't you admit even a tiny bit? What good would that do?" she asked sharply. "And also, What are you prepared to do for me?" "I? I'd help," he began. But he checked himself. It was true, he couldn't offer much. He really was useless to her. With Gersbach, she could still be a wife. He came home. She cooked, ironed, shopped, signed checks. Without him, she could not exist, cook, make beds. The trance would break. Then what? Why do you come to me if you want custody of your daughter? Either do something by yourself or forget it. Let me alone now, Moses. This, too, was perfectly just. Silent, he stared hard at her. The early and native tendency of his mind, lately acting without inhibitions, found significance in small, bloodless marks on her face. As if death had tried her with his teeth and found her still unripe. "Well, thank you for this talk, Phoebe. I'm going." He stood up. There was a softer kindliness in Herzog's expression, not often seen. Rather awkwardly, he took Phoebe's hand, and she could not move fast enough to avoid his lips. He drew her closer and kissed her on the head. "You're right. This was an unnecessary visit." She freed her fingers. "Goodbye, Moses." She spoke without looking at him. He would not get more from her than she was able to spare. "You've been threatened like dirt. That's true. But it's all over, But it's all over. You should get away. Just get away from this now." The door was shut. Crumbs of decency, all that we paupers can spare one another. No wonder personal life is a humiliation, and to be an individual contemptible. The historical process, putting clothes on our backs, shoes on our feet, meat in the mouth, does infinitely more for us by the indifferent method than anyone does by intention. Herzog wrote in The Rented Falcon, "And since these good commodities are the gifts of anonymous planning and labor, what intentional goodness can achieve when the good are amateurs, becomes the question, especially if, in the interest of health, our benevolence and love demand exercise, the creature being emotional, passionate, expressive, a relating animal, a creature of deep peculiarities, a web of feeling intricacies, and ideas now approaching a level of organization and automatism where he can hope to be free from human dependency. People are practicing their future condition already. My emotional type is archaic, belongs to the agricultural or pastoral stages." Herzog could not say what the significance of such generalities might be. He was only vastly excited in the streaming state, and intended mostly to restore order by turning to his habit of thoughtfulness. Blood had burst into his psyche, and for the time being he was either free or crazy. But then he realized that he did not need to perform elaborate, abstract, intellectual work he had always thrown himself into, as if it were the struggle for survival. But not thinking is not necessarily fatal. Did I really believe that I would die when thinking stopped? Now, to fear such a thing, that's really crazy. What do you... He went to spend the night with Lucas Ashfalter, telephoning from a sidewalk booth to invite himself over. "I won't be in the way, will I? Have you got anybody there with you?" "No." I want you to do me a special favor. I can't phone Madeline to ask her to see the child. She hangs up on me as soon as she recognizes my voice. Will you call and arrange for me to pick up June tomorrow?" "Why, of course," said Ashfalter. "I'll do it now and have the answer for you when you get here. Did you just blow in on impulse? Unplanned?" "Thank you, Luke. Please do it now." He left the booth, reflecting that he really must rest tonight, try to get some sleep. At the same time he hesitated somewhat to lie down and shut his eyes. Tomorrow he might not be able to recover his state of simple, free, intense realization. He therefore drove slowly, stopping at Walgreens, where he bought a bottle of Cutty Sark for Luke and playthings for June, a toy periscope, through which he could look over the sofa round corners, a beach ball you inflated with your breath. He even found time to send a wire to Ramona from the Yellow Western Union office at Blackstone and 53rd. "Chicago business. 2 days," was the message. "Much love." Trust her, she'd find comfort while he was away, not be despondent in desertion, as he would have been, his childish disorder, that infantile terror of death, that had bent and buckled his life into these curious shapes. Having discovered that everyone must be indulgent with bungling childmen, pure hearts in the burlap of innocence, and willingly accepting the necessary quota of consequent lies, he had set himself up with his emotional goodies: truth, friendship, devotion to children, the regular American worship of kids, the potato love. So much we know now, but this, even this, is not the whole story either. It only begins to approach the start of true consciousness. The necessary premise is that a man is somehow more than his characteristics. All the emotions, strivings, tastes, and constructions with it pleases him to call my life. We have ground to hope that a life is something more than such a cloud of particles, mere facticity. Go through what is comprehensible, and you conclude that only the incomprehensible gives any light. This was by no means a general idea with him now. It was far more substantial than anything he saw in this intensely lighted telegraph office. It all seemed to him exceptionally clear. What made it clear? Something at the very end of the line. Was that thing death? But death was not the incomprehensible accepted by his heart. No, far from it. He stopped to gaze at the fine hand beating its way over the face of the clock, the yellow furniture of another era. No wonder large corporations raked in such profits. High charges, old equipment, no competitors. Now, that postal telegraph was knocked out. They certainly got more mileage out of these yellow desks than Father Herzog did out of the same kind of furniture on Cherry Street. That was across from the cat house. When the madame didn't pay them off, the cops threw the whores' beds out of the second-story windows. The women shrieked Negro curses as they were pushed into the wagon. Father Herzog, the businessman, musing at these aliens of vice and brutality, police and barbarous obese women, stood among such tables. Standard second-hand equipment acquired in warehouse sales. Here my ancestral fortune was founded. In front of Ashfalter's house, he locked the Falcon for the night, leaving Junie's gifts in the trunk. He felt certain she would love the periscope. There was much to be seen in that house on Harper Avenue. Let the child find life. The plainer the better, perhaps. He was met on the staircase by Ashfalter. "I've been waiting for you." "Is something wrong?" said Herzog. No, don't worry. I'm picking June up at noon tomorrow. She goes to a play school, half-days." "Wonderful," Herzog said. "No trouble?" "With Madeline?" "Not at all. She doesn't want to see you. Otherwise you can visit with your little girl to your heart's content. She doesn't want me to come with a court order. Legally she's in a dubious position, with that crook in the house. Well, let's have a look at you." They entered the apartment, where the light was better. "You've grown a bit of a beard, Luke." Nervously and shyly, Ashfalter touched his chin. Looking away, he said, "I'm brazening it out." "Compensation for the sudden unfortunate baldness?" said Herzog. "Fighting a depression," said Ashfalter. "Thought a change of image might be good. Excuse my pad." Ashfalter had always lived in such graduate student filth. Herzog looked about. "If I ever have another windfall, I'll buy you some bookshelves." "Luke, about time you got rid of these old crates. This scientific literature is heavy stuff. But look, you've got clean sheets on the studio couch for me. This is very kind of you, Luke." "You're an old friend." "Thanks," said Herzog. To his surprise, he found difficulty in speaking. A swift rush of feeling out of nowhere caught his throat. His eyes filled up. "The potato love," he announced to himself. "It's here." To advert to his temperament, call things by the correct name, restored his control. Self-correction refreshed him. "Luke, did you get my letter?" "Letter? Did you send me one?" "I sent you a letter." "Never saw it. What was it about?" "About a job. Remember Elias Tuberman? The sociologist who married that gym teacher? Don't joke. He's general editor of Stone's Encyclopedia and has $1 million to spend on revision. I'm in charge of the biology. He's looking for you to take over in history." "Me?" "He said he read your book on Romanticism and Christianity over again. Didn't think too highly of it in the 50s when it came out, but must have been blind. It's a monument, he says." Herzog looked grave. He began to make up several answers, but abandoned them all. "I don't know whether I'm still a scholar. When I left Daisy, apparently I quit that too. And Madeline snatched it right up. Yes, they divvied me up. Valentine took my elegant ways, and Maddie's going to be the professor. Isn't she coming up for her orals?" "Right away." Remembering now the death of Ashfalter's monkey, Herzog said, "What got into you, Luke? You didn't catch TB from your pet, did you?" No, I've taken the tuberculin test regularly. No." "You must have been out of your mind giving Rocco mouth-to-mouth respiration. That's letting eccentricity go too far." "Did they report that too?" "Of course. How else would I know? How did it get into the papers? One of the little bastards in physiology picks up a few bucks by spying for the American. Didn't you know the monkey was tubercular?" "I knew he was ailing, but had no idea. And I certainly wasn't expecting to be so hard hit by his death. Herzog was not prepared for the solemnity of Ashfalter's look. His new beard was vari-colored, but his eyes were even blacker than the hair he had lost. It really threw me into a spin. I thought that pawing around with Rocco was a gag. I didn't realize how much he meant to me. But the truth is, I realized that no other death in the world could have affected me so much. I had to ask myself whether the death of my brother would have shook me up half as much. I think not. We're all some kind of nut or other, I realized, but you don't mind if I smile, Herzog apologized. I can't help it. What else can you do? A man could do worse than to love his monkey, said Herzog. Le coeur et ses raisons. You've seen Gersbach. He was a dear friend of mine, and Madeline loves him. What have you got to be ashamed of? It's one of those painful emotional comedies. Did you ever read Collier's story about the man who married a chimpanzee? His monkey wife. An excellent story. I've been horribly depressed, said Ashfalter. It's better now, but for about 2 months I did no work, and I was glad. I had no wife or kids to hide these crying jags from. All because of that monkey? I stopped going to the lab. I doctored myself with tranquilizers, but that didn't continue. I had to face the music, finally. And you went to Dr. Edvig? Herzog was laughing. Edvig? No, another head shrinker. He calmed me down. But that was only 2 hours a week. The rest of the time I was shaking. So I got some books out of the library. Have you read the book by that Hungarian woman, Tina Zokali, about what to do in these crises? No. What does it say? She prescribes certain exercises. Moses was interested. What are they? The main one is facing your own death. How do you do that? Ashfalter tried to maintain an ordinary, conversational, descriptive tone. Obviously, it was a very difficult thing for him to talk about. Irresistible, though. You pretend you have already died, Ashfalter began. The worst has happened. Yes? Herzog turned his head as if to hear better, listen more intently. His hands were folded in his lap. His shoulders had dropped with fatigue. His feet were turned inward. The musty bookish room, with a clamp light affixed to one of the crates, and the stirring of leaves in the summer street, brought Herzog some peace. True things in grotesque form, he was thinking. He knew how that was. He felt for Ashfalter. The blow has fallen. The agony is over, said Ashfalter. You're dead, and you have to lie as if dead. What's it like in the casket? Padded silk. Ah. So you construct it all. Must be pretty hard. I see, Moses sighed. It takes practice. You have to feel and not feel, be and not be. You're present and absent both. And one by one, the people in your life come and look. Father, mother, whoever you loved or hated. And then? What then? Herzog, wholly absorbed, looked at him more obliquely than ever. And then you ask yourself, what have you got to say to them now? What do you feel for them? Now there's nothing to say but what you really thought. And you don't say it to them because you're dead, but only to yourself. Reality, not illusions. Truth, not lies. It's over. Face death. That's Heidegger.
What comes out of this? As I gaze up from my coffin, at first I can keep my attention on my death and on my relations with the living, and then other things come in. Every time. You begin to get tired? No, no. Time after time I see the same things. Lucas laughed nervously, painfully. Did we know each other when my father owned the flop house on West Madison Street? Yes, I used to see you at school. When the Depression hit, we had to move into the old hotel ourselves. My father made an apartment on the top story. The Haymarket Theater was a few doors away. Do you remember? The burlesque house. The burlesque house? Oh, yes. Luke, I used to cut school to watch the bumps and grinds. Well, first of all, what I began to see is the fire that broke out in that building. We were trapped in the loft. My brother and I wrapped up the younger kids in blankets and stood by the windows. Then the hook and ladder company came and rescued us. I had my little sister. The firemen took us down, one by one. Last of all was my Aunt Ray. She weighed nearly 200 pounds. Her dress flew up as the fireman carried her. He was very red in the face from the weight and strain, a great Irish face. And I was standing below and watched her buttocks coming slowly nearer, that tremendous rear part, and the huge cheeks so pale and helpless. And is that what you see when you play dead? A fat-assed old auntie saved from death? Don't laugh, said Ashwalter, himself grimly laughing. That's one of the things I see. Another is the burlesque broads from the next door. Between turns, they didn't have anything to do. The picture was running. Tom Mix. They got bored in their dressing rooms, so they'd come out in the street and play baseball. They loved it. They were all big, hearty, corn-fed girls. They needed exercise. I'd sit on the curb and watch them play. They were in their burlesque costumes, all powdered and rouged, their hair done up, and their tits heaving as they pitched and batted and ran the bases. They played piggy move-up, softball. Moses, I swear to you, Ashwalter pressed his hands to his bearded cheeks and his voice shook. His fluid black eyes were bewildered, painfully smiling. Then he drew his chair back out of the light. Perhaps he was about to cry. I hope he won't, thought Herzog. His heart went out to him. Don't feel so bad, Luke. Now listen to me. Maybe I can tell you something about this. At least I can tell you how I see it. A man may say, from now on I'm going to speak the truth. But the truth hears him and runs away and hides before he's even done speaking. There is something funny about the human condition, and civilized intelligence makes fun of its own ideas. This Tina Zaccoli has got to be kidding, too. I don't think so.
Then it's the old memento mori, the monk's skull on the table, brought up to date. And what good is that? It all goes back to those German It all goes back to those German existentialists who tell you how good dread is for you, how it saves you from distraction and gives you your freedom and makes you authentic. God is no more, but death is. That's their story. And we live in a hedonistic world in which happiness is set up on a mechanical model. All you have to do is open your fly and grasp happiness. And so these other theorists introduce the tension of guilt and dread as a corrective. But human life is far subtler than any of its models, even these ingenious German models. Do we need to study theories of fear and anguish? This Tina Zaccoli is a non-essential woman. Tina is nonsensical. She tells you to practice overkill on yourself, and your intelligence answers her with wit. But you're pushing matters. This is self-ridicule to the degree of anguish. Bitterer and bitterer, monkeys and buttocks and chorus girls playing piggy move up. I was hoping we could have a talk about this, said Ashfilter. Don't abuse yourself too much, Luke, and cook up these fantastic plots against your feelings. I know you're a good soul, with real heartaches, and you believe the world. And the world tells you to look for truth in grotesque combinations. It warns you also to stay away from consolation if you value your intellectual honor. On this theory, truth is punishment, and you must take it like a man. It says truth will harrow your soul, because your inclination as a poor human thing is to lie and to live by lies. So if you have anything else waiting in your soul to be revealed, you'll never learn about it from these people. Do you have to think yourself into a coffin and perform these exercises with death? As soon as thought begins to deepen, it reaches death. First thing, modern philosophers would like to recover the old-fashioned dread of death. The new attitude, which makes life a trifle not worth anyone's anguish, threatens the heart of civilization. But it isn't a question of dread or any such words at all. Still, what can thoughtful people and humanists do but struggle towards suitable words? Take me, for instance. I've been writing letters helter-skelter in all directions. More words. I go after reality with language. Perhaps I'd like to change it all into language, to force Madeline and Gersbach to have a conscience. There's a word for you. I must be trying to keep tight the tensions without which human beings can no longer be called human. If they don't suffer, they've gotten away from me. And I've filled the world with letters to prevent their escape. I want them in human form, and so I conjure up the whole environment and catch them in the middle. I put my whole heart into these constructions, but they are constructions. Yes, but you deal with human beings. What have I got to show? Rocco? But let's stick to what matters. I really believe that brotherhood is what makes a man human. If I owe God a human life, this is where I fall down. Man liveth not by self alone, but in his brother's face. Each shall behold the eternal Father, and love and joy abound. When the preachers of dread tell you that others only distract you from metaphysical freedom, then you must turn away from them. The real and essential question is one of our employment by other human beings, and their employment by us. Without this true employment, you never dread death. You cultivate it. And consciousness, when it doesn't clearly understand what to live for, what to die for, can only abuse and ridicule itself, as you do with the help of Rocco and Tina Zaccoli, as I do by writing impertinent letters. I feel dizzy. Where's that bottle of Cutty Sark? I need a shot. You need to go to sleep. You look ready to cave in. I don't feel bad at all, said Herzog. I've got some things to do anyway. Go to sleep. I haven't finished grading all my exams. I guess I'm folding, Moses said. The bed looks good. I'll let you sleep late. Plenty of time, said Ashfilter. Good night, Moses. They shook hands.